Have you ever found yourself scrolling for hours, but the second you try to read a book, your brain just checks out? Or maybe you've noticed how classrooms today feel like this constant battle for focus? Well, today we're going to dig into a massive shift in how we think that might explain everything. We're talking about the clash between what author Katherine Hayles calls hyperattention and deep attention.
So let's just dive right in. What does this change actually look like in the real world? We're talking about a huge shift in our cognitive styles, one that's creating this brand new kind of generation gap. And it's not just about what music you listen to, it's about the very way our brains are being wired to process information.
I mean, just think about it for a second. The way we take in information has been completely turned on its head. Not that long ago, focus probably meant someone getting lost in a single book for hours on end. Today, it's much more like a dance between a phone, a laptop, a video game, maybe a TV show in the background, all at the same time. This isn't just a simple preference, it's a fundamental change in how we think.
And this gets us to the heart of the idea. The argument is that we can really understand this divide by looking at two very different and often competing ways of paying attention: deep attention and hyperattention.
Okay, so first up, you've got deep attention. This is that classic, single-minded focus we've always been told is so important. It's that state you're in when you're completely absorbed in a tough math problem or a really dense novel, and the rest of the world just fades away. It's patient, it's linear, and it goes deep.
And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have hyperattention. This mode doesn't just survive in a different environment, it thrives on it. It's all about jumping quickly between tasks, juggling multiple sources of information, and always looking for a high level of stimulation. For hyperattention, boredom is the ultimate enemy.
So here's the really important part. Neither one of these is inherently better than the other. They're just different tools for different jobs, you know? Deep attention is amazing for tackling a complex problem that exists in a single place, like a book. But hyperattention, that's way more useful for navigating a super fast-paced, constantly changing world where a million things are fighting for your focus at once.
This quote just nails the whole concept perfectly. You literally have deep attention and hyperattention living together under the exact same roof. The sophomore is completely immersed in the quiet, internal world of the novel. Meanwhile, her brother is plugged into this highly interactive, super stimulating digital world. They're in two totally different cognitive zones.
So you might be wondering, is this all just a feeling, or is this shift actually happening? Well, the evidence is pretty overwhelming, and it's all centered around what researchers have started calling Generation M, with the M standing for media.
Let me just ask you a quick question to kind of frame this. Take a wild guess. On any given day, how many hours do you think a young person, say between 8 and 18, spends consuming media?
If you guessed 6.5 hours, you are spot on. According to a huge study by the Kaiser Family Foundation, that's the daily average. But get this, because they're so often multitasking on different devices at once, their total media exposure is actually closer to 8.5 hours. That's more than a full-time job.
But this is where it gets really, really interesting. Take a look at how that time breaks down. See that little bar for traditional print reading? The classic activity for deep attention? It accounts for less than half an hour of that entire media diet. It's just completely dwarfed by screen time.
And this isn't just about what they do for fun. This habit of multitasking has bled directly into their schoolwork. Over 60% of students say they're consuming other media, listening to music, texting their friends, watching TV, while they're supposed to be doing homework. This is hyperattention in action, plain and simple.
Now, this constant stream of information and jumping from task to task, it's doing more than just changing our habits. The research is pointing to something much deeper. It's physically changing the neural pathways in our brains.
There's a really interesting parallel here with ADHD. Some psychiatrists are starting to suggest that maybe ADHD isn't just a deficit of attention, but rather a constant search for stimulation. When you frame it like that, the behaviors of hyperattention suddenly fall along a much broader spectrum, where that need for high stimulation is what's driving everything.
So, how does this rewiring actually happen? Well, it's all thanks to something called neuroplasticity. The simple way to think about it is that our brains are incredibly adaptive. The neural pathways we use all the time get stronger and faster, like well-worn trails in a forest, and the ones we don't use, they get pruned away. Our brain literally customizes itself based on the world we live in.
So the real takeaway here is this. A brain that grows up in a media-saturated world. A brain that's constantly strengthening the pathways for switching tasks and processing multiple streams of info. That brain is going to be physically and functionally different from a brain that was mostly shaped by the slow, linear, single-focus act of reading a book.
And this is where the rubber really meets the road. This fundamental change in our neurology is creating a massive and growing disconnect inside our traditional schools.
This quote from a professor basically sums up a feeling that Hayles heard from educators all over the place. Teachers are on the front lines, seeing this change happen in real time. The old methods, the ones that demand long periods of deep attention, are just not landing the way they used to with the generation that's wired for hyper-attention.
Here's the conflict laid out right in front of us. Our entire education system is, for the most part, built on the values of deep attention. It rewards quiet focus, long assignments, and mastering one thing at a time. But the students in those classrooms, they're increasingly hyper-attentive. They want stimulation, they prefer to multitask, and they have almost zero tolerance for boredom. It is a fundamental mismatch.
So what's the answer? Do we try to force students to change, or do we change the system itself? This brings us to the most important question of all. How in the world do we bridge this cognitive divide? This is the choice facing every educator today. The first path would be trying to, train students back into deep attention, maybe with focus exercises or other interventions. The second path, though, involves a total rethinking of what a classroom and even what an assignment should look like in the first place.
The suggestion here is that the answer isn't to just give up on deep attention, but to use hyperattention as a kind of gateway to get there. I mean, imagine using a social media platform to analyze characters in a classic novel, or comparing the puzzle solving in a video game to the narrative puzzles in a really difficult book. The whole idea is to meet students where they are, in their world, to help guide them into new ways of thinking.
And that leaves us with this final, really critical question to chew on. This isn't just about getting new gadgets for the classroom. It's about facing the fact that the very brains of our students are changing because of the technology that surrounds them. So the challenge isn't just to update our teaching tools, but to fundamentally rewire our entire approach to learning itself.